revolution. Now, a revolution is something that when you're not happy with the status quo, you go into a flight mode, if I may call it that, where you want to bring change. And sometimes it has to do with climbing into the politics, if we can put it like that, to try and bring a change. But we're speaking from the perception of how can love create a revolution in the environments where we are. Now, I want to start with a story, and this morning we're speaking about the theme, loving God. Last week we spoke about God is love. Now, just imagine for a moment, you are driving along a road surrounded by mountains and trees. When all of a sudden, when you pass the trees, you move into a valley. This valley opening before your eyes as you drive, and you see this big river running. It almost reminds me of when I was still in Limpopo, driving from Polokwane through Magubas Kloof to Sanin. That picturesque beauty. A great river running through it, and the biggest trees that you can think about running along the banks of this river. Wildlife, plants, a lot of ferns, and beautiful pictures that you can take. This all appears in a moment before your eyes. What is your natural response to that? Wow, amazing, beautiful, incredible, takes my breath away. And it's not a made-up, practiced response. It's something that hits you in the chest, and you're so overwhelmed by the natural beauty that you see before you. It's almost like when you're watching sport. You don't celebrate or respond as the game starts. None of us, last night, when the Springboks were playing Mamelodi Sundowns, they won 2-0 yesterday. But we didn't celebrate when the whistle started, when the game started, because we did not know what the outcome would be. But when the first goal was scored, we were jumping around. When the Springboks scored the first try in the second minute of the game, we knew we were in for something special. You see, there is hope for things moving into the right direction. But never do we celebrate a try or a goal before the kickoff of the game. We don't say, hey, congratulations for the 2 goals you're going to score today. That might be faith. Let me say it this morning. Everyone on earth is worshiping something. And every day we worship different things. If we say that worship is the response to revelation, then we worship the source of that revelation in our lives. If we let money or success or objects or things that we want reveal to us who we are, we will worship that. You see, if our focus is on getting things and becoming this person that climbs the corporate ladder and pushes everybody out of our way, then that is who we become, and that is who we worship. John 4 verse 22 to 24 says, you worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and it is now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. You see, in the Bible, when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well, He said to her, she's worshiping something that she doesn't know. when we understand this morning, church, when we understand that God is love, and we truly understand that He loves us, and that He gave His life so that we may experience the fullness of life, we respond in a certain way. And that response is called worship. You see, worship is not a way in which we call God to come closer to us, or just a way we can move closer to Him so that we can maybe feel loved, or that we think we can experience Him more. Worship takes us from a knowledge of God to experiencing intimacy with God. Worship is where we celebrate the love that God has for us, and where we can experience Him in His fullness of how He feels about us. 1 Corinthians 8 verse 1 to 3 says the following. He says, "Now about food sacrificed to idols, which is worship, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone thinks he knows anything, he does not yet know it as he ought to know it. But if anyone loves God, he is known by Him." You see, the word knowledge used in verse 1 is the word in Greek gnosis, which means applied knowledge. But it is only as accurate as the relationship it derives from. You can only have applied knowledge if you're in a relationship with someone. It's knowing their tics, it's knowing their facial expression, is knowing that before they say something, you already know what they want. Applied knowledge. It's when the husband wants to ask for a cup of tea, and the wife says, "Tea?" She knows the look. She knows the manner. In verse 2 and 3, it also uses the same concept, knowledge, but it's a different Greek word. Almost just a paraphrase. It's the word gnosko, which means to have intimate knowledge. To know something because of first-hand experience. It's not a story that was told, but it's understanding it because you had first-hand experience. Many people come to South Africa with the idea that they want to have good cuisine. Let me quickly tell you this morning, church, we as Africans, we know how to prepare food. You can go anywhere in the world, it does not taste like our food. Yeah, I know for sure. Ronnie, you know, you were there in New York now. Those guys think they can make food. They have no idea. When I was in London as well, firstly, when we went there, we were there for about 2 months. We had to take extra bags because our family asked for all the South African spices, Raja, chutney, Mrs. Balls, tomato sauce, because you can't find our stuff there. And remember, you can try and make food with their spices. It just doesn't taste the same. And everything in England, everything has got baked beans on the plate. Breakfast, lunch, supper, baked beans. Now, it would still be okay if the baked beans has a bit of vinegar and sugar just to balance it. But their baked beans is so bland. You cannot know how good our food is until you have first-hand experience. You can tell the whole world, South Africa and Africa has good cuisine. But you can't say it if you haven't tasted it. And it's the same with this thing, gnosko. It's not talking about something that you've heard, but it's something that you have experienced firsthand. You see, because of this intimate knowledge of God's love for us, and that His love, that He is love, we respond not because we were taught to, but because it's a natural response. It's when they put down that nice 6.5 hours leg of lamb with the nice baked brown potatoes around the leg of lamb. And that first cut you cut, it marbles that fat piece on the side. And when you take that, there's a response. Yo! This is good. But you can't have that response if you haven't tasted it. That nice brown gravy sauce that you made when you took out the leg of lamb into those juices. You know what I'm speaking about. We know, we understand. It's a natural response to the experience, church. We have a natural response to the one that first loved us. And our response is to want to worship him. But we have to challenge the idea of how we show love. And today we're going to talk a bit about that. That showing love, our response is to minister to people. When we worship, it is ministry to people. Teaching and transforming us and others. And releasing this almost prophetic word of love over people. Where it becomes our outreach and our evangelism. So let's quickly talk about this concept of ministry to God. We're just taking in part of a conversation that is already happening before the throne. We proclaim with the angels, with the creation, with other Christians that God is God and He is a good God, He's a faithful Father, and He is love. So the Father is honoring His Son, that His Son came, proved His love, and the Son is honoring His Father by listening to His Father, by sacrificing Himself. And we, in our relationship, we honor them all by loving and being available. David did this multiple times when he wrote in Psalm 100 about how he brings glory and honor. And I want to read it to you. He says in verse 1, "Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before Him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people, the sheep of His pasture. Enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him and what? Praise His name. For the Lord is good and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues, not just today, not just yesterday, not just tomorrow, but for all generations." It's not about you and me. Worship has nothing to do with our needs or our preferences. Yeah, but if Calvin will just sing that song, can't we just have the drums a bit softer? Or can't we just have the drums a bit louder? Can't we just dance a bit more in the church? Can't it be a bit more reserved? When we think that worship revolves around how we need to feel, or how we think we should experience God, we are missing the point. God comes and reveals to us how He feels about us, and how He does things in worship that ministers to us. This is relationship, church. This is intimacy. Worship is sometimes communication. Is all the time communication from God to us. And then we respond by loving Him back, which we call worship. Worship is firstly and should lastly be our revelation or our response to the revelation of who Christ is in us. John Piper said the following. He says, "God is most glorified in me when I am most satisfied in Him. You see, and that takes us to a place where we minister to people. When showing your love for God by worshiping Him, other people around us start seeing our relationship. And they want to become part of that relationship. They want to experience that relationship. I mean, by just me talking about the leg of lamb and potatoes, how many of you want to taste that leg of lamb and potatoes? I want to. I want to walk in at home and the leg of lamb is ready. But not just the leg of lamb, the rice. It can also be stump mealies. That will also be fine. Pumpkin fritters with a nice long caramel sauce. Beans with potato and cream. I want to taste it. You see, our life starts talking to people. And people start becoming hungry for the spiritual food. So our lives start talking to them. I want to emphasize it this morning, church. We must not think worship is the 25 minutes we spend singing in church. Hello? What we did this morning, singing songs, we testified to the goodness and the greatness of God. But that's not worship. It's part of worship. But that's not how worship is defined. You see, your life speaks a message of who you adore. That is worship. So the way you act at work, the way you act at the sports field, breek hom frikkie, kikkies teeth in. You're worshiping something. So when you say, break his back, we'll pray for him later for healing. It's not the right message. It was like Bakkies Botha always. You remember, he ran on the field, and before the ball was kicked off, he would go to the middle line, and he would pray, and he would say, Lord, please forgive me for what I'm about to do. And then he would run that first loose scrum. You will just see teeth and eyes and bones break as he hits a loose scrum. You don't always equate. So singing is part of worship. And you've heard it many times, and I want to use it again. Worship is a lifestyle that glorifies the one you love. Worship is the way in which you do your work and how you serve those around you. You see, the Hebrew word for worship used in the Old Testament is the word avodah, which means work, worship, and service. And if you think about the people in the Old Testament, there was no distinction between their lives, their work, and everything around them. Worship is a way in which you and I can show our love for God. How? By loving people that needs His love. And once again, I want to take you to our mandate. We believe that in Doxa Deo, we want to help people know God. So that when they know God, they become His hand extended. They experience who He is and the love He has for people. But love is not just a word. Love has an expression. So by knowing God, loving people, we have to impact our world. And as Doxa Deo, we believe we're a family on mission. What mission? To become the biggest church? To establish His kingdom in our community. 1 John 4 verse 7, and I'm also reading verse 11 and 12, says, My beloved friends, let us continue to love each other, since love comes from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and experience a relationship with God. You see, the measurement of relationship looks a bit different than what we sometimes think. God measures relationship with love. Verse 11 and 12, my dear friends, if God loved us like this, we certainly ought to love each other. No one has seen God ever. But if we love one another, God dwells deeply within us. And His love becomes complete in us. What does it say? Perfect love. Perfect love. When you and I understand that our worship is all of our actions and attitudes because of our response to love, then we understand that these actions and attitudes will show others the love of God around us. And this is the natural outflow of the love of God within us. Now this morning, I don't know what time it was, one of our dogs was very restless, running from the bed onto the floor, back onto the bed, under the blanket, over the blanket, running across. And at one stage, he's just behind me, or so I thought. So I just want him to stop. So I move back, and I do this with my arm, and he's not there, and my wife's face is there. Aina! She shouts. So now I'm awake because, sorry, are you okay? So now, that expression of love wasn't the right expression. So what do? I think it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock, because now she's awake. We're awake. She's sitting. I quickly go make her some tea with some nice sugar so she can have that. So she can experience the expression of not wanting to slap her, but just giving her some tea. Church, I want to emphasize it this morning. If we forget about everything this morning, our love for God should be expressed in the way we love people around us. There's no other way. We cannot say we love people around us and there's no expression. I want to say it again. We cannot say we love people around us if there's no expression. You cannot say you love your spouse if there's no expression of love. I love you, but you kick me like a dog. Slap me in the middle of the night. It's like that clip. I don't know if you guys have seen it on social media. This lady is looking at her husband, but he's snoring. I mean, so she looks at him and she's sick of it, and she comes from the side and she hits him on the chin and falls down to sleep. And this guy wakes up. He has no idea what happened. His chin is massively sore, but his wife is sleeping. It's almost, I'll sort you out. You want to keep me awake. Our expression has to show that we love people. There's a great example of this in Matthew 28, where the disciples go and they meet Jesus on the mountain. And when they see him, they start worshiping. This is his response to that worship. He says, in verse 17 of Matthew 28, he says, when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. In that moment, he could have told him anything, but he says to them, go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Go and love them. Go and express my love. My love that you have experienced. Go and love them. You see, the Great Commission for us is to go and to evangelize, and when necessary, speak. See, we should show through our love and through our interaction with people that there's a better way of living. Not by telling them, because you can tell them what you want to. People don't become what you tell them. People become what they see. You see, many times when you get an assignment, you react. But we say worship is a response. When we reach out to others with the love of God, it should come from a place of wanting to and not religious obligation. It should be a natural response. Acts 2 verse 46 to 37 says, continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. It wasn't about them. It wasn't about what they could do. It wasn't so that they could be important. Praising God and having favor with certain people, with some people. No, with all people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Church, it's going to take a love revolution to bring people out of darkness into light. People have a huge amount of resources where they can go onto the internet and they can go and listen to international sermons, international pastors. People can go onto the internet and they can get elevation worship. They can go and listen to maverick worship. They can go and listen to all the talented people in the world. If that would have been the change, people would already be saved completely. But that's not what makes the difference, because you cannot experience love through a television screen. You cannot, when you are hurting, cry on a television shoulder. You cannot pick up the phone and phone them and say, I want to bury my mother. Because they're not available for you. Because they are through a TV screen, chasing numbers on a screen. The local church is still the hope of the local community. And the local members, the city changes, are the hope to the people that are in need, expressing our love. You see, and by expressing our love, we start talking prophetically into people's lives. We speak truth over them. You are not who the world says you are. You are a son and a daughter of the King. You are no longer a sinner, but you have been declared righteous. You are finished with the world system. You live according to a different set of rules and a different platform. We speak the truth into their lives. And they start living according to that realization. 2 Peter 1 verse 21 says, no prophecy was ever produced by the will of man, but men spoke from God as they were carried by doing the will of the Spirit. See, we teach and we transform because we understand the opinion that God has for us. Let me ask you this question. How many times do you hear some of your friends going through a bad patch? And they ask you, why is God punishing me? Why is God angry with me? Why am I going through this? You see, they're going back to the Garden of Eden, where they live from this Adam reference. But we're supposed to live from a Christ-like reference. That although things happen, it's not a reflection of how God feels about me. You see, thank goodness my wife didn't jump out of the bed and say, I'm phoning the police because you hate me. Because I slapped her. Yeah, I slapped her good. I'm just joking. Can you think in the newspaper Monday morning, Pastor of Doxadeo slaps his wife, giving the dog the blame? Who's going to believe that? Church, this is so important that we live from the right reference. Things happen to us. My Audi, which I'm so proud of, is now being serviced. And it's been there now for 4 weeks. So I'm afraid for the bill because the bill is coming. At one stage we were talking about 20,000 rand. Might be up. But then I'm going to get another 5 years out from it. It's coming. Life happens. I drive out here and somebody skips the stop street and they hit my car. It happens because we live in a broken society. My father, 4 years ago, had to have a back operation. They had to do 5 fusions in his back. And they only authorized 2. So he had to go again now. Now for the next 6 months, he's got to wear this big plastic thing. He can't sit. He can only lie. He must pendulum himself from the bed. My mom can't help him. It's just crazy. Why is this happening? Because you're 74 and you're becoming older and your body's not as strong as it was. It's not God. It's the natural way of how things are transpiring. So we need to understand that the things happening to us is not a reference to how God feels about us. But then we remind ourselves through Scripture that He says, you are loved, you are mine, you are a son, you are daughter, you have been declared righteous. And when we start living from that fact, the things of earth become strangely dim in the light of His glory and power. Romans 12 verse 1 in the Amplified says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies, dedicating all of yourself, set apart as a living sacrifice, holy and well-pleasing to God. That is your rational act of worship. And then he challenges this way of thinking. Do not be conformed to this world by its superficial values and customs, but be progressively transformed, changed, as you mature spiritually, by the renewing of your mind, which means focusing on godly values and ethical attitudes, so that you may prove for yourself that the will, or what the will of God is. I want to wrap up and say today, when our worship becomes more than the couple of songs in a worship set we sing, we will start seeing God's love working through us. We need to truly understand what this lifestyle is. We need to know that worship has got nothing to do with my emotions. It's got nothing to do with my will or even my experience. But worship must and will always be a response to His revelation in my life. It's not a reaction or an action I perform in church, but it's an overwhelming response to the truth of His wonderful love. Eugene Peterson says the following. He says, worship is the strategy by which we interrupt our preoccupation with ourselves and we attend to the presence of God in our lives. When our worship changes from a me focus to a God focus, and from a knowledge of who God is to an intimacy. You see, knowing God doesn't mean I have relationship. It's when it moves from a knowing who He is to an intimate relationship that we will see the love of God for me, but also for those around me. And seeing that love He has for those around me, I start expressing that same love to my community, to my neighbor. And we're going to talk about it in week 5. Even to my enemies. All those people that have hurt you, they don't like you, that connive and try to break you. Loving even your enemies. And by closing, I just want to, for a moment, just challenge. Busani, you're welcome to come and play for me. You for a moment. While every eye is closed. I remember growing up, having communal street braais, where my parents knew all the people living in their street, knowing their neighbor, visiting with the neighbors, borrowing things from the neighbors, having this sense of community, sense of village. How many of you know your neighbors? How many of you are available when your neighbor goes through a crisis? Does your neighbor have the confidence to reach out to you? By asking that question, I just want us to just realize what it entails to love God. Because expressing that to our neighbors is loving God. Expressing His love for us to those around us is loving God. And God is challenging you and me. How can we love people back into relationship with Him? Not sharing theology, not sharing clever ideas, not selling something, but loving them into relationship with Him. Back to where they were separated and are no longer separated. You see, we have the capacity to create a love revolution where people in our community are loved back into. And Father, my prayer for us here this morning is that we will take up our responsibility of not thinking that worship is just coming together, having a service, singing a few songs, but truly understanding that worship is a response to the revelation of who you are in our lives. And that we respond to that revelation by loving you and showing you to those around us, and creating an environment where people through our lives and through the love we have for you and the love we show to them will be restored in their relationship with you. That our love will create a revolution in every space we are, and we will love people back into the fold of having a relationship with you. Help us to measure the cost, and help us to measure the value we bring in the environments we are. And that we will stop looking at our work as a paycheck, looking at the sports fields as a place of engaging through sport, but that we will see it as a place where we can create a revolution of love. And where the people in our workspaces, the people in our family spaces, in our friendship spaces, in our sports societies, and whatever cultural functions or whatever sport clubs we are, it becomes the environment where people are loved back into relationship with you. And I give you glory and honor and praise in Jesus' name.